Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Today we are diving deep into the answer to one of Quizzypedia's most intriguing questions.
Sounds interesting. Which one?
Season 208, question 5 to be precise, from the category of philosophy.
Okay, hit me with the question.
The question is, what term describes a statement or proposition that despite sound reasoning from acceptable premises leads to a conclusion that seems senseless, logically unacceptable, or self-contradictory, for instance, the Ship of Theseus?
A classic. The answer is, of course, paradox.
Right, you are. A paradox is like a riddle wrapped in a puzzle. It presents a statement or a situation that seems to contradict itself, but might actually contain a hidden truth or maybe reveal limitations in our understanding.
Paradoxes are more than just mind-boggling puzzles, though.
Definitely.
They're important tools in philosophy because they force us to think critically and question our assumptions.
It's like they hold a mirror to our logic and make us confront its boundaries.
Precisely. And while paradoxes often deal with abstract concepts, they can also have real-world implications, popping up in fields like science, mathematics, even everyday decision-making.
Okay, so let's unpack one of the most famous paradoxes, the Ship of Theseus. This thought experiment delves into the very nature of identity and asks how it persists over time. So imagine a ship that gradually has all its parts replaced one by one until none of the original material remains.
So then, is it still the same Ship of Theseus?
That's the question that has baffled philosophers for centuries.
I can see why.
There are two main perspectives. One is that if an object's identity is tied to its physical components, then the rebuilt ship is different. But if the identity is about the form and function of the object, then it could still be considered the same ship.
Very interesting.
It really gets you thinking about how we define identity not just for objects, but for ourselves too.
Right.
As we journey through life, we change physically and mentally. But does that mean we become different people?
It really makes you ponder what makes us who we are and where our sense of self truly comes from. It's a paradox with no easy answers, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Now let's switch gears and venture into another famous paradox, the grandfather paradox. This one grapples with the mind-bending concepts of time travel and causality.
Time travel always makes my head spin a little.
I know, right? All right, so picture this. A time traveler goes back to the past and kills their grandfather before their parent is even born.
Okay, I'm following.
So logically, the time traveler would never have existed in the first place.
Right.
But then how could they have gone back in time to kill their grandfather?
A real head-scratcher.
It challenges the very possibility of time travel to the past because it creates such a mind-bending contradiction.
So how do we even begin to untangle this?
Well, there have been attempts to resolve this paradox. One of the most intriguing is the Novikov self-consistency principle. This principle suggests that the past cannot be altered. Any actions taken in the past were always part of the timeline, meaning the timeline is self-correcting, making sure paradoxes can't actually happen.
So it's like the past is set in stone. So does that mean we don't really have free will? Our choices are already decided.
A question that philosophers have debated for ages. Does free will exist if the past is fixed and the future is predetermined? A question the grandfather paradox really makes us confront.
I'm starting to see why paradoxes are so fascinating.
Me too.
What are some other solutions to the grandfather paradox?
Another possible solution lies in the idea of parallel universes or branching timelines. So this theory suggests that when a time traveler does change the past, they actually don't alter their original timeline. They create a whole new, separate timeline that branches off from the point of alteration.
So if the time traveler kills their grandfather, it wouldn't erase their existence in the original timeline.
Exactly.
That's a relief.
A new timeline would simply emerge, one where the grandfather is dead, and the time traveler's existence might be quite different or even non-existent. But the original timeline where they were born remains untouched.
That makes more sense.
This concept of parallel universes has been a popular theme in science fiction, offering a way to reconcile the possibility of time travel with the preservation of causality.
It's like having your time-traveling cake and eating it too.
Exactly. It allows for the possibility of changing the past without creating those troublesome logical contradictions in the original timeline. But then, of course, it raises a whole new set of philosophical questions. Are these parallel universes really real? If so, do they interact with each other? And what implications do they have for how we understand reality?
Whoa, that's getting pretty deep.
It is. It's an area of speculation that continues to intrigue both physicists and philosophers.
Fascinating.
Now let's dive into a paradox that's deeply rooted in language and logic. The liar paradox. This one revolves around a simple, yet incredibly perplexing statement. This statement is false.
Okay, I'm listening.
So if the statement is true, then by its own claim, it must also be false. But if it's false, then its claim of being false is incorrect, making the statement true.
My head is already spinning.
It's a classic example of a self-referential paradox. The statement refers to itself, creating a logical knot that's nearly impossible to untie. The liar paradox has had a major impact on fields like logic, mathematics, and philosophy.
It shows how a seemingly simple statement can create such complex ramifications.
Precisely. And it's actually related to Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which demonstrate the inherent limitations of any formal system of mathematics.
So even within systems that seem perfectly logical, there are limits to what we can know and prove.
It seems so.
That has some pretty profound implications for our understanding of truth and how we acquire knowledge.
Definitely. We also see echoes of the liar paradox in science fiction, especially in stories involving artificial intelligence. Think about those scenarios where self-referential paradoxes cause AI systems to malfunction. It highlights the complications that emerge when we try to define truth within systems that can refer to themselves.
AI and paradoxes are a recipe for some serious mind-bending scenarios.
Absolutely. Now let's shift our focus to a paradox that takes us into the realm of ethics, the trolley problem. This thought experiment presents us with a tough choice, a choice with potentially life-altering consequences.
Ethical dilemmas always make me a bit uneasy.
I hear you. So here's the classic scenario. A runaway trolley is barreling down the tracks toward 5 people who are tied up and can't move. You have the option to pull a lever, which would divert the trolley onto a side track where only one person is tied. Do you intervene and knowingly sacrifice one life to save 5?
Whoa, that's heavy.
It is. And there's no easy answer. It's a classic dilemma that pits utilitarianism, the idea of maximizing happiness, against deontological ethics, which focuses on following moral rules and duties.
So do we prioritize the greater good or stick to our principles even if it leads to a less desirable outcome?
Exactly. The trolley problem has no easy answers. Different ethical frameworks can lead to different conclusions about the right course of action.
It forces us to grapple with the complexities of moral decision-making and face the inherent difficulties of defining what is truly ethical.
Right. And it also highlights the fact that there might not always be a universally acceptable solution to ethical dilemmas. The trolley problem has also become even more relevant in our current world with the rapid development of autonomous vehicles and artificial intelligence.
I can see how that connects.
We now have to wrestle with the question of how to program these systems to make ethical decisions, especially in situations where human lives are at stake.
Programming ethics into machines, that's a challenge and a half.
It is. It raises a whole host of new ethical challenges. How do we teach a machine to understand human values and then apply them in complex, real-world situations?
A question for the ages.
It is. And it's one we'll be exploring more in depth in our next segment.
You know, going back to the Ship of Theseus for a minute, we were talking about those 2 main perspectives on whether the rebuilt ship is the same as the original.
Right.
Well, what if, as we're replacing those parts of the original ship, we actually collect all those old pieces,
Okay.
and then using those old parts, we construct a second ship, identical in form to the original?
So now we've got 2 ships claiming to be the real Ship of Theseus.
Precisely. Which one is the true Ship of Theseus, then? The one built entirely of those new materials, or the one constructed from the original parts, even though it was assembled later?
Now, that is a fascinating twist on the original paradox.
It really is. The ship made of new materials might argue that it represents that continuous form and function of the original, but then the ship made from the old parts could claim a stronger link to the ship's history and its origin.
It makes you wonder if an object can have multiple identities.
Right.
Or if that act of reconstruction fundamentally changes its essence regardless of the materials used.
A really interesting thought. And this variation of the Ship of Theseus paradox can also be applied to personal identity, too.
Oh, how so?
If we think about our memories and experiences as the parts of ourselves, what happens to our sense of self as those parts change over time?
Do we remain the same person even as our memories fade, our beliefs evolve, and our bodies age?
It kind of suggests that maybe personal identity is more like a constantly evolving narrative than a fixed and unchanging entity.
Interesting. Now, turning our attention to the liar paradox, we see how this statement is false, generates that self-contradictory loop.
Right.
One way to think about this paradox is through the concept of levels of language.
Okay.
This statement is false, operates on two different levels.
It does.
On one level, it's referring to itself as a statement. On another level, it's making a claim about its own truth value.
I see.
The paradox arises when we try to combine those two levels, treating the statement as both referring to itself and asserting something about itself at the same time.
So it's like a linguistic tangled web.
It is. By separating those levels, we can see that the statement isn't inherently paradoxical. It just creates an illusion of paradox by blurring the lines between language and metalanguage, the language we use to talk about language.
Oh, okay.
It's similar to the way a mirror reflecting another mirror creates that illusion of infinite regress.
Right.
That infinite regress we see is a product of the reflection,
Okay.
not an inherent property of the mirrors themselves.
So by distinguishing between the statement itself and the claim it's making about itself, we can avoid getting trapped in that self-contradictory loop.
Precisely. It's a way of defusing the paradox without dismissing the power of self-reference in language and logic.
The liar paradox, even when analyzed this way, still highlights those complexities that arise when language refers to itself.
It does.
It reminds us that language is a tool with limitations,
It is.
and that self-reference can lead to those unexpected and thought-provoking challenges.
Now, going back to the trolley problem, we see it presents that stark ethical dilemma, forcing us to choose between two very unpleasant outcomes. But we can actually make it even more challenging.
How so?
Let's change the scenario a bit. Instead of pulling a lever, you're now standing on a bridge overlooking the tracks.
Okay.
The only way to stop the runaway trolley is to push a large object off the bridge, blocking its path.
I'm seeing where you're going with this.
The only object heavy enough to stop the trolley is a person standing next to you. Do you push that person off the bridge, sacrificing their life to save those 5 people on the tracks?
This variation adds such a significant psychological element to the dilemma. In the original scenario, pulling a lever feels like a much more detached action.
It does. But in this version, physically pushing someone off a bridge creates that sense of direct personal responsibility for their death.
It does. It makes the choice so much more difficult emotionally, even though the outcome is the same.
It is.
One life sacrificed to save 5. This version of the trolley problem really highlights the fact that our moral judgments aren't always based solely on logic or outcomes.
Right.
Emotions, intuitions, and personal experiences also play a significant role.
It brings into question whether universal moral principles even exist, or are our ethical decisions ultimately subjective, shaped by our individual values and the specific context of the situation.
You know, we've explored a wide range of paradoxes today, but they all share some common threads.
What threads do you see?
One is that tension between intuition and logic. Many paradoxes highlight how our intuition can lead us astray, especially when dealing with complex or counterintuitive concepts. Another common thread is the exploration of the boundaries of language and logic.
Paradoxes like the liar paradox and the Sorites Paradox force us to confront the limits of language.
They do.
And the challenges of defining concepts precisely. And a third thread that runs through many of these paradoxes is that examination of ethical dilemmas and the complexities of moral decision-making.
Like with the trolley problem, it challenges us to think critically about our values.
It does.
And the principles we use to guide our actions. These paradoxes serve as valuable tools for sharpening our thinking, expanding our perspectives, and embracing that inherent complexity of the world around us.
Thank you for joining us on this intellectual journey.
We hope that has sparked your curiosity.
And inspired you to continue pondering the mysteries and paradoxes that make our universe so captivating.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.